This meeting is being recorded.
What is happening, everybody? Welcome into another episode of the Mile High on Broad podcast. We got a great show for you guys today. We're going to be discussing the top 10 running backs headed into the 2023 season. We're going to be joined today by a special friend of the show, Dan. So thank you for joining us, Dan. Dan's been a longtime fantasy colleague of mine, so I'm really excited to get his input on where we see some of the running backs headed into next year. I will say for me personally, this was a lot more complicated to put this list together than it was for the quarterbacks. A lot more people and, a lot of guys that can justify moving up or moving down. I know we all have some differences in our list. So definitely excited to kind of see where we all land with anybody. And once we finish going through our list, we'll sit down, we'll kind of discuss, why we decided to put some of the guys where we put them. And I think it's going to be a good time. So Dan, as the guest, let's have you kick it off. Let's run us through your list. Who you got number one overall?
I got McCaffrey. I think it's a pretty easy pick. The rest of this list is a lot harder, but McCaffrey's pretty set number one. The only question is whether he's going to get the workload. They like to feed some of the other running backs there, even when they got top tier guys. But even with that question, I don't think you can pick anyone else number one. So yeah, number two, I've got Jonathan Taylor, and I think if he's healthy, he's still ascending. I don't know if we've seen the best of him yet. And, the Colts were extremely unhealthy on the O-line last year, and even like halfway back to health, and he looks like he can put up another elite season. With Eckler, the only question I have is he's my three. He's kind of like McCaffrey. He does everything. But, what I've noticed is, at least at the beginning of last year, they started to try to give him less of a workload. It's just that their other running backs are terrible. So if they get somebody that can actually put some production on the field, I don't think they want him to be as much of a workhorse. But they've also proven to be really bad at that. So if he gets the same workload, he's still going to be elite. I got Saquon number 4. However, with him being a free agent, if he signs somewhere spectacular, I think he could jump all the way up to 2. We finally got to see him fully healthy last year for the most part, other than a few nicks and dings. And he's elite. And I still think we could see better from him. He does everything. Number 5, I got Henry. He's a freak. He runs people over. He's one of the fastest players in the league. But the Titans were so bad last year other than him. So, the question is whether they bounce back to being a semi-decent offense around him, or if it's going to be 9 in the box and, pile 4 people on Henry every play. After that, I got Kenneth Walker, who, I think he's still ascending. And, in 3/4 of a season last year, he put up massive numbers. Pete Carroll loves his workhorse running backs when he has them. But, he just hasn't had healthy backs for the past 4 or 5 years. But you guys will remember, like, Thomas Rawls, nobody who put it up. Look at, back to the Marshawn Lynch days, nobody else got touches. They've had a bunch of guys that have come out of nowhere to put up big seasons, and they drafted him to be that next guy. I think that, a full season of him could be top 5 pretty easily. After that, I've got Josh Jacobs, who was arguably the best running back in football last year. The only question is where he lands and what that offense looks like. Because, if they don't bring in another quarterback and they're starting, who knows, that offense doesn't move the same. And, we've seen Jacobs, when not given full workloads, up until last year, he has not looked elite. So, everybody knew he had the talent, but for some reason, nobody ever gave him the work. And if it goes back to a timeshare, I don't think he can put it up again. I've got Ramondre Stevenson next, and it's not a homer pick. The Patriots drafted him to be that guy. I don't think that they ever believed in Harris to be, a 3-down back because he couldn't catch the ball right. And I mean, the rumors out of camp are he's not being re-signed. It doesn't look like they're going to go after somebody in the draft who's going to, take significant snaps. They have Pierre Strong, they have Kevin Harris, and I think they're going to let those guys be the ones who spell it. And Ramondre's got all the makings of, easy top tier running back. I've got Nick Chubb at 9. And my question with Chubb is the Deshaun Watson factor. So, I mean, Nick Chubb is a great running back. Don't get me wrong, but that's not a great offense that, last 6 games of the season. It didn't look good at all. And Chubb didn't either. So, what happens with Kareem Hunt? Are they going to, find somebody else to split carries or, catch the ball out of the backfield? If they don't, and they finally let Chubb do that, then maybe it bumps up, but he's also getting older. We've never actually seen him be a top 3 back. So, I mean, even with the talent. Then my last guy's Mixon. And this is pure talent. He could have kind of put probably 4 or 5 people in this spot, but I still think Joe Mixon is a top 5 talent at running back, that his usage goes away. It gets game scripted out when Burrow just wants to run things. They're not centering the offense around him the way they were last year, the year before. And I think if they did, he could still put up the numbers, but I also don't think there's anybody else that has a convincing enough argument for me to put them above him. That could change, see a couple situations change, but yeah, that's where I'm at with my 10.
You had some really good points, and I'm not gonna lie, you're going through some of those guys, and I'm looking at my list, and I'm starting to second guess my list on some points that you made that I didn't consider. With some of these guys, and I'll bring up some of them once we wrap up our list. But one for sure, I already moved him down 1 spot from this morning to the time we did this show, and now I think I probably got to move him down even further. So, Mike, let's go ahead and hear your list.
Yeah, so we're starting off the same. CMC's number 1. I don't think that there's much of an argument going on here with anybody, not even just here, just anyone that watches football. He's clearly the best back in the league when he's healthy. That's the only slight question mark people have had about him the last couple of years. But this year he seemed to be pretty healthy. Shanahan loves his running backs. And so even with the fact that they can do things with him and Elijah Mitchell, it doesn't matter to me. CMC's just the most well-rounded running back in the league. So for me, he's number 1. For me, number 2 then comes to that freak Derrick Henry that we were talking about earlier. For me, Derrick Henry is just the best rusher in the NFL. I know that he's definitely not the best pass catcher, but he's also one of only 8 or 9 guys ever to throw up 2,000 yards before he looked like he was going to put it up back-to-back seasons until he broke his leg. And then this year he had a minor step back, but some of that was due to the offense needing to change without A.J. Brown, because they don't have a true number 1 wide receiver. They don't have a very good quarterback. So Henry gets a lot of those touches. And so while his production dropped a little bit, that's also kind of helping him a little bit too, in the sense that they have to rely on him a little bit more. So I still have Henry at the number 2. For number 3, I have Josh Jacobs. He led the league in rushing last year. A lot of that came from the overtime game with Seattle, where he had something like 299 scrimmage yards or 301 scrimmage yards or something like that. But I could definitely see him having a step back next year. He's been kind of up and down his whole career so far. It seemed like his first year in the league, he kind of took the league by storm. I was a big doubter of him his first year, but he came in, had like 1,100 yards all purpose or something like that. And then he kind of tailed off for a couple of years. And then he had another big year this year. Part of that is obviously due to his contract and he wants to get paid. So we'll see. I could definitely see him taking a step back. I'm not totally sold at him, but just based on what he did last year, I have to keep him super high. At number 4 is where I think we're probably going to have a good discussion. I have Dalvin Cook at number 4. For me, I've been a big fan of Dalvin Cook ever since he entered the league. He had a couple of rough years in the beginning where he was getting hurt, but after his first 2 years, I think he's just kind of taking the league by storm. He's a perennial 1,100 to 1,500 yard running back. On top of the fact that he's able to pass catch, he seems to find the end zone fairly frequently. And I think having his backup in Alexander Madison, who's going to be gone this year most likely, means that Dalvin Cook's going to be getting even more touches. So I'm expecting a pretty big year from Dalvin Cook. That offense seems to run through him and Justin Jefferson almost exclusively. So I would imagine Dalvin Cook's going to end up having a pretty big year this year. From there, I'm going to Nick Chubb. I think Nick Chubb is probably the second best pure rusher. Like if you said, hey, it's 3rd and 1, it's 4th and 1, and we need to hand the ball off and get a first down, Henry's my first pick and Nick Chubb is my second pick there, honestly. He's just, he's an averaging 5 yards a handoff type of guy every single year. He also has a nose for the end zone. The guy has something over like 32 touchdowns or something like that these last 3 seasons, which is top 5 in the NFL. Kareem Hunt is, question marks on what he's going to be doing next year. He's most likely not going to be coming back. So he's probably going to be the lead back, and he had 1,500 yards last year. So I wouldn't expect a ton of decline from him. Maybe his yards per attempt go down, but I imagine that's going to mean that he's going to end up getting more touches than before. From there, I'm going to Aaron Jones. I think Aaron Jones is another guy that's kind of being slept on a little bit by a lot of people. Some of that is because he splits a little bit of his carries with A.J. Dillon, but A.J. Dillon's kind of the bruiser. Aaron Jones is kind of more so their every down back, if you will. He's definitely a better pass catcher than I think a lot of people give him credit for. Just in general, he's another guy that averages about 5 yards per carry. And so, that for me, that tells me a lot if you're averaging 5 yards per carry. From there, I'm going to Jonathan Taylor. The only reason why I dinked him so much is because he was unhealthy last year. He's a guy who I could definitely see moving up the list for sure. I definitely agree that his best years aren't behind him, but I just need to see a little bit more from him this coming year than I did last year because, I don't think that he's going to be as injured that he was last year. That's not who he's been through his entire career. So I expect him to have a bounce back year. From there, I'm going with my first rookie last year. I think the guy that should have won, the guy that was going to win Rookie of the Year for offensive players was Breece Hall, but he ended up getting hurt. But I mean, the guy was nothing short of electric last year. Everybody knew that he was going to be the best running back coming out of that class. I think he proved that until he had that freak incident. I think it was an ACL or that he tore or something like that. Yeah, so it was an ACL. ACLs aren't what they used to be. We've seen running backs come back from these kinds of things before. And so I get the concerns and the question marks behind it. And maybe I'm projecting out a little bit more than just next year. But in general, I think he's a top tier running back. So that's why I have him at number 8 this year. From there, number 9 is the guy who I think should have won Rookie of the Year this year in Kenneth Walker. Ken Walker was amazing. Everything Dan kind of touched on. He wasn't even the starting running back the entire season, but when he did, he definitely shined. And then from there, at number 10, I'm going with Travis Etienne. He's Trevor Lawrence's best friend, from college. Those two just seem to be clicking together, and I think they're doing a lot of special things right now in Jacksonville. So I'm expecting to have him have another really good season. And I think another year removed from that injury, and another year in Dougie P's offense, he should be really good next year.
Perfect. So with my list, number 1, it's Christian McCaffrey. We all got the same guy, number 1. It's the only one that we agreed on the entire list, but you guys have touched on it. I mean, his one big thing has always been his health. It's not like it's been the same injury. They've been different injuries. They've just been major. But Shanahan seems to be doing a good job of spelling him when he needs to, but still getting him significant touches, whether it's through the air or on the ground. He's averaging 20 touches since he got to San Francisco. I mean, the guy is just electric with the ball in his hands, whether it's on the ground or in the air. I mean, he can do it all at an elite level. He's clearly the best running back in the game. Number 2 for me is Derrick Henry. I get the thought of this team struggling. Their offense isn't what it used to be. It's all Derrick Henry. But my thought is it's always been just on Derrick Henry. Even when Tannehill was playing his best, that game still ran through Derrick Henry. He's just a freak of nature. And until I actually see him slow down, which I can't put on him until I see it, because he's just that outlier of a human being, then to me, he's just ridiculous. The guy over the last 3 seasons has 5,200 yards. That's counting injuries, which is 400 more than any other player in the NFL. And he has 40 touchdowns on the ground alone in 3 seasons. I mean, the dude is just a freak of nature. So for me, Derrick Henry easily is number 2. I got Jonathan Taylor at 3. He's, the only one that I put on my top 10 who missed, significant, playing time last year. But, as kind of Dan touched on, I mean, the guy is just an elite runner of the football. In his years in the league, he's finished third, fourth in his 2 full seasons in all scrimmage yards. And that was with him having question marks at quarterback. Now you're going to bring in a new head coach in Shane Steichen, who just came from one of the top rushing offenses in the entire league. And my thought is they're going to have a rookie quarterback at the 4th pick, which means you're going to do what? You're going to rely more on your running game. Jonathan Taylor is an elite back who can do it all. And he's going to continue to excel now that the line's going to be healthy. His injuries, they were minor ankle sprains. They're going to be fully healthy by the time he gets back to playing time next year. At 4 for me, it's Josh Jacobs. I was really shocked as I was going through where I wanted to put this guy. But for me, Josh Jacobs, he's done things, I think, quietly under the radar. So obviously this year he led the league in rushing. He also led the league in scrimmage yards. Last year, or if you combine the last 2 years, he's also number 1 in overall scrimmage yards. And over the last 3 years, he's 4th in total scrimmage yards. This is a guy who wasn't really given the ball to pass. He's played for a Raiders team that always found ways to shoot themselves in the foot. And given the full workload, he actually looks like the guy that a lot of people said he could be, but was never really given the chance to be. I get it. He could end up in a position where, they want to put him somewhere else, but you don't take a guy that played the way that he's played the last 2 years, who's proved he can carry a full workload, who just led the league in rushing, that's going to want a big paycheck. Whoever gives him that paycheck isn't giving him that paycheck to give him 10 touches a game. So he's going to get the workload next year. So unless he gets hurt, he's just going to continue to kind of be one of those top backs in the league. I dropped Chubb down. He is an elite rusher of the football. In my opinion, he's the 2nd best pure rusher in the league behind only Derrick Henry. He's a good receiver if he needs to be, but that's definitely not his bread and butter. But I mean, you can't argue with $1,500 yards rushing. He's just a great running back. At 7 or 6, I have Saquon Barkley. I really thought going into this I'd have him a little bit higher. He is an elite back. He coming into the league, he was drafted 2 overall. They expected him to be elite. He's that guy that, anytime he touches the ball, he can take it for 80 yards to the house. And there are not a lot of running backs that have that ability to do that. He can catch, he can run. They literally revolved the entire offense around him last year. I put him down a little bit just because we saw him kind of trail off a little bit in the second half, but he's still one of the best running backs in the entire league. This guy might be a little shock for some people, but at 7, I got Tony Pollard. This guy's been splitting carries his entire career with Zeke, who might not even be there. If you listen to some of the rumors that they're talking about pulling his workload or potentially even cutting Zeke because nobody wants to trade for him. Tony Pollard rushed for 1,100 yards, 1,000 yards, 300 yards receiving. He was considerably more electric than anything we've seen out of Zeke for years. And this was with him getting maybe 10 touches, 12 touches a game because he's splitting carries the entire time. If we're talking about putting Tony Pollard in a position where, and I do think he gets franchise tagged and he stays in Dallas, he's going to get the sizable workload coming out of Dallas in that offense. Tony Pollard is going to amaze a lot of people with what he's going to be able to do on the field next year. Eckler, for me, comes in at 8. Strictly because of his ability as a rusher. I mean, the guy is dynamic. He is one of the best receiving backs in the league. He has a crazy nose for the end zone. He's actually, over the last 3 years, the only one with more total touchdowns than Derrick Henry. But he rushed for only 915 yards last year. And as Dan kind of alluded to, they are starting to pull back some of his workload. So if you get a guy who excels in the passing game, but now we're going to get a fully healthy receiving core back that was completely beat up last year, and they're going to pull some of his rushing away because he's a smaller back and he's getting a little bit older. I just don't know if I can put him that high. He's going to get in the end zone a decent amount. He's good at that kind of stuff. But I mean, if we see him put up 800 yards on the ground and 600-700 yards receiving again, he's good, but he's not top 5 for me. At 9, I got Travis Etienne. This is a foreshadowing for what I think the Jaguars offense and Trevor Lawrence can do with another year under Doug Peterson. If I'm going to put Trevor Lawrence as I think I'd have a top 5 quarterback in the league. I have to assume that this offense is going to take a step forward. Travis Etienne wasn't even the lead back for the first 7 weeks of the season. He was running behind James Robinson. When they gave him the full workload, I mean, the dude was dynamic. 1,100 rushing yards. he's really good. And he's doing a lot of the stuff that, a lot of people have questions mark, right? Is he going to just be a receiving guy to the back, or is he going to be able to run the ball? And he was considerably better just taking the ball between the tackles than he was catching the ball. So I think another year of this offense excelling, he's going to take those steps forward. At 10, I got Kenneth Walker. You guys touched on it, I think, both times you talked about it. I mean, this kid is in a position where, as a rookie, he was everything he was talked up to be. He's a phenomenal runner, and he's in an offense that's going to rely on the run game first and foremost. That's how Pete Carroll has always run his offenses. So when you have a guy who looks like he can stay healthy, he's probably the best rusher they've probably had since Marshawn Lynch was there. And now you're going to give him a massive workload that he didn't even get until week 7 when he started to take over. I think Kenneth Walker has a huge year ahead of him. So those are my top 10. We had some people the same. We had some differences. You guys made some good points on some people. There were definitely some guys that I had close that I just couldn't move up into my top 10 for one reason or another. I'm probably going to adjust this list as soon as we get done with this call here. The Chubb factor, I have 5 just based on what he's done for 3 years. But you're right. When Deshaun Watson took over, the fact that, if he does look anything like he did when he was in Houston next year with his ability to run, and Chubb's numbers did. I mean, they fell off a cliff, when he took back over. And I didn't even put any of that consideration in there. So where I still think Chubb is the second best runner, it's kind of the same argument I had with Eckler. Like, if he's not getting the full workload that he could to be elite, I don't know if I can put him as high. So I might have to drop him down. Let's have a discussion on Eckler. Mike, you didn't even have him on your top 10. I have him down all the way at 8. Dan has him all the way up at 3. So we're kind of all over the place with Eckler. Let's get your guys' thoughts on Eckler and why he's all over the place like this.
Yeah, so I guess I can kind of start off on why I don't have him. So first off, this list was way harder than the quarterbacks, right? I think that there's genuinely a good case for a lot of these running backs that we left off these lists to be in the top 10. So I don't want to think anyone, I don't like Austin Eckler. No, I think Austin Eckler is great. It's just there's so much talent. I left off Saquon Barkley, right? There's just a lot of really good running backs.
You hate Saquon, so
I haven't. We can get into that later. We can get into that later.
Yeah, it's on your shirt. We understand it.
Yeah. Well, no, it has nothing to do with that. It's anyways. Back to Eckler a little bit. My reason for dropping Eckler off so much is it's just like you said, Ben. He ran for like 900 yards and change in 17 games. He's just, I don't know. I like my running backs to be better runners than catchers. He seems to be a better catcher. I think he's a top 10 weapon. If you want to go like, all weapons in the NFL, okay, sure, maybe he's a top 10 weapon, but his running and his receiving kind of don't seem to, be in alignment for my personal taste. He's great though. He definitely gets into the end zone a lot, but 17 games and you're still not rushing for 1,000 yards. And next year they may be pulling some of his workload back a little bit. This is why I kind of left him off my list.
I mean, Dan, you've already convinced me to move Chubb down my list, so convince me why I should move Eckler up.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think he's proven that he can handle a pretty big workload. He's had over 200 carries each of the last 2 years, and it's resulted in, 915-ish yards each year. But he's also had 12 and 13 touchdowns, which makes it not really a fluke. I mean, he's done it twice in a row. And I guess my argument for what Mike said is, despite the fact that he might not be elite in terms of his rushing stats, he still plays the position running back. So that's what we're, doing here. And the fact that he had over 100 catches last year definitely makes up a little bit for the fact that he only had 900 yards receiving, because that's a separate way. It might be a different way of using the running back. But I mean, if we're going to make the argument for CMC being so versatile, then you can't take that away from Eckler. I mean, the guy's led the league in touchdowns the last 2 years, like from the running back position. Not necessarily rushing touchdowns, but overall touchdowns. I mean, my literally only question is if they actually draft somebody to take away some of his touches, which they've tried to do the last 3 seasons and failed at. So, that's why until they do, I can't move him down.
Those are fair arguments. I mean, look, and it could be a benefit to him too, right? I mean, we saw that Christian, especially down the stretch, he looked really good. And part of it was he was a lot fresher when he touched the ball because they were spelling him a lot more with a guy like Elijah Mitchell that, opposing defenses still have to account for. The Chargers, they haven't had anyone who can even pretend to be a competent running back in the backfield. And Eckler himself has come out and said, like, hey, you have a big run, like you need a breather. So maybe he does have better rushing stats next year if he gets a little bit more, spell time to be able to go out there and just really capitalize, because he is electric with the ball in his hands. The next one that I put on here, I don't know where Dan sits, but for me, is Breece Hall. So, Mike, you had him on your list at 8. I didn't put him on my list. And for me, the biggest reason was the injury, right? I mean, the guy rushed for 5.8 yards a carry when he was in the game, which is ridiculous. I mean, I do think he's a ridiculous back. My question is, if you look at the league's history over the last decade, most running backs, their first year back from an ACL, they're not as good as they were before. They don't have the same speed. They don't have the same breakaway. Their yards per carry is a little bit lower. Their elusiveness is definitely a lot lower. Now, 2-3 years down the road, do I think he could be back in my top 10? Yeah, absolutely I do. But next year, I'm just thinking, hey, unless he's that one outlier that we see every year, he's going to regress a little bit from what he did last year. And for me, that's enough to keep him off my top 10.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of why I've put him up there, though, is because I think I'm expecting him to bounce back for sure. Like you said, 5.8 yards per carry, that's a ridiculous number for a running back per carry. I don't know. For me, also coupling that with he got hurt so early, and he's so young. When you're a little bit older, then I definitely think that's when you start to see a lot of these injuries will take their toll on you. But the guy's going to be in his second year in the league. He has Garrett Wilson, who is, going to be able to take some pressure off of that running game. He has Elijah Moore, who, he's not bad when he has a decent quarterback throwing the ball to him. And then on top of the fact they're going to be getting a new quarterback, I think that all those kinds of things combined makes me confident in that. I think he's going to have a pretty good bounce back year. And like I said, even if he doesn't, he definitely will be in the future. But I think for next year, it's hard for me to put Walker or Etienne above him, or, I guess Etienne wasn't a rookie, but, it's hard for me to put Walker ahead of him because he was going to end up winning Rookie of the Year, no doubt. And so I think I may be weighing that a little bit more heavily than, you two probably were.
Yeah, so I guess my debate against Breece Hall is two-pronged. First, it's the injury. A big part of his success is his explosiveness. So it's not a question of whether he'll get that back next year. But if we're only talking about 2023, if he doesn't have it by week 6, if they spell him with a couple other guys to, not give him a full workload, then I don't think he hits top 10 numbers. And then the second thing is the Jets are a dumpster fire. And we can say bringing in a new quarterback will fix that. But people said that about Christian McCaffrey and the Panthers for years. And then he didn't get fixed until he left. So the Jets have proven over and over again that they're not good at picking quarterbacks or bringing them in. And the Panthers are even worse because they take the Jets scrap heap. So Zach Wilson will probably be their starter next year, but that's a whole different story. But that's my argument against Breece Hall. There's too many question marks coming in. First half of the season, I don't think he's going to put up big numbers, and I think it'll be too much to make up at the end.
See, I don't know, because even with the Panthers, even when they were still struggling, I mean, CMC was still considered the best running back in the league. The only issue was just he couldn't stay healthy. So I don't know if having the bad quarterbacks helps or hurts, because that can go in two directions. Because if your quarterback is so bad you have to run the ball, you're going to get more touches. But if your quarterback is so bad and everyone knows you're running the ball, they could load the box. So it can definitely go either way for sure.
True, but McCaffrey wasn't making his hay in the running game so much at that point. It was the fact that the quarterbacks had to dump it off to him, and he was an elite receiving back, which I don't think Hall has proven yet. So, again, he could surprise people, but if it was one of those two questions, I'd have him in my top 10. I actually wrote him up and then moved him down as I kind of did it. I had him around 8 as well, but yeah, he probably would fall at 11 or 12 with all the questions right now for me.
And that's right about where I have him, in that 12, 13 kind of a spot. Let's see. All right, let's get this big one out of the way. Dalvin Cook, 4 for Mike, not even in the top 10 for either of us. Dan, why is Cook not even deserved to be in the top 10?
Well, it's not his offense anymore. And they're drafting weapons to be a passing offense, which they said before last season that they were. I mean, that's what their new offensive coordinator's there for, is to make them a pass first offense. You can see it in the numbers. He rushed for 100 yards twice last season. So, and he's getting older. He's been more banged up. He had off-season shoulder surgery. So, again, it's just he's on a downtrend, and I don't think we're going to see a massive tick back up. I understand that Madison's out of the way, but Madison was not taking away touches from Dalvin Cook anyway. He was only there when Dalvin couldn't be on the field because of the shoulder or because he needed rest or something like that. Madison thrived as, when he got to step in for an injury, but I mean, that wasn't changing Dalvin's workload. So I don't think I'm seeing him bounce back and like increasing where he was last year with the trend that this offense is going. And I think, another year of Hawkinson takes away some of his passing work. I think KJ Osborne steps up and, becomes another offense. Kirk likes to spread the ball, and he proved it. And that's what I think this offense is trending towards. Nothing against Dalvin. He's been great, but I just think that he's headed downwards.
I think for me, that's the same thing I got, right? I put declining next to his name, and I think he is a phenomenal back, especially in his time. And, Mike wasn't wrong. I mean, over the last few years, the guy has been great. We always missed 2 or 3 games, but, when he was on the field, he was good. For me, it's just they bring in a new coach in McConnell, who clearly wants to go to more of this pass happy offense. They showed that last year, and he's getting older. I mean, you can see the ages catch up. This guy that could never stay healthy when he was young and in his prime. Now he's 28, something like that, I think, right? I mean, he's well past the prime for running back, right? After about 26, running backs start to decline. This guy's going into 28. His numbers have been declining every single year. You saw a lot more of Madison at the end of last year. And yeah, they're probably going to lose him, but I think that just goes to show that Dalvin Cook can't handle 20-plus touches anymore. They're going to rely more on the passing game. And for that, I can't put him above some of these guys like a Barkley, who the offense is 100% revolving around when they're phasing Dalvin Cook out. He's still a part of the offense. They're not going to cut him like they're going to cut Zeke, but he's just not the guy that he was 2 years ago.
Yeah, see, it's interesting that you guys say that he's having these declines and he's less healthy than ever before. His first year, he played 4 games. The next year, he played 11, and he played 14, and he played 14, and he played 13, and last year he played all 17, right? I get that he was hurt a little bit and, with the shoulder, and that's fine, but that didn't cause him to miss any time. In terms of his production, he went from 1,100 yards in 2019 to 1,500 yards in 2020 to 1,100 yards to 1,100 yards. I'm just not seeing a decline. Now, maybe I'm not seeing an increase in him, but I think he's been a perennial top 5, top 10 running back for the last couple of years when he's healthy. Coupling that with the fact that he's also I think he's an underrated pass catching back. I don't know if they use him a ton in that way, but he can definitely do it for sure. So I don't know. I'm not seeing the decline that you guys are talking about.
All right, guys. So we're going to get ready to wrap up. I want a final thought from each of you, a running back that popped out, somebody that was hard for you to rank, somebody you wanted to put higher but couldn't, somebody you're excited to see next year, just something from looking at all these names, numbers. We both thought, we all kind of said it's been hard to rank some of these guys. So I want just a final thought on this running back, going into next year and kind of what you think. Mike, we'll start with you. Final thought for the day. Go.
Yeah, for me, I thought Pollard was the hardest back for me to put anywhere. I think he has the potential to certainly be a top 10 running back, but the fact that year over year, he's only been getting somewhere between 10 and 12 touches per game on top of his injury, on top of I don't know where he's going to be next year. For me, it was just one too many question marks to put him definitely in my top 10, but we'll see what he does. So yeah, for me, he was definitely the hardest back to rate, but he could definitely be very good for a team somewhere else.
All right, Dan, what you got for us?
So my tough one is one that you're going to like, but Javonte Williams, it's kind of the same thing as Breece Hall, though, with the injury. There's too many question marks, entirely new system coming in, albeit, a system that's very productive for running backs, but he had a nasty ACL. And I mean, I think talent-wise, and if we were ranking for 2023 and forward, he'd easily be probably top 6 for me. But as I did things out, it didn't fit. I think that same issue as Hall with even bigger injury question.
Yep. When I was rating the end of my list, ETN, Walker, I had Stevenson at 11. I mean, I could have coin flipped some of those guys, but for me, when I looked at the bottom chunk, the guys who didn't make my top 10, it came down to one of three things. Are they aging it on their way out? I'm talking guys like Dalvin Cook and, Aaron Jones, guys that have been really good, but I think are probably on the decline, and too many questions for me to keep putting them where they were. You got some of these young guys that are coming up, the injuries, right? Javante's knee was gone. It wasn't just an ACL. I mean, his whole knee is gone. We saw the same injury with Saquon. It took him 2 full years to even look anything like himself. I love Javonte. Mike knows this. I wish he was going to be healthy. I really don't think they are. I think they're going to have to bring in somebody else to help, because I don't think there's any way Javonte looks anything like himself. Even if he steps foot on the field week 1, I don't think he's going to get anywhere close to who he was, which is just a punishing runner. Same thing with Breece Hall. It's injuries, right? I have to pull some of these guys back because of injury. And then some question marks with some of these younger guys coming up and kind of where they land. Pierce, looked good last year, but I don't think he's elite. I was like, all right, I'm gonna drop him down a little bit. He did rush for decent yardage, and I looked at the guys like Tyler Algier, who didn't really even do anything till the second half of the season, still rushed for 1,100 yards. I'm like, man, was I sleeping on this Tyler Algier kid? What's he going to look like? He played on arguably the worst roster in the entire league and still put up 1,100 yards, and he only ran for half the season. To a Najee Harris, who, I got major question marks about that team as a whole and his inefficiencies. So where I think he's a good back in a different situation. So I think there were just a lot of questions. I'm excited to see where some of these guys ultimately end up landing, and what they end up doing. We didn't even talk about some of the guys coming in. Bjorn Robinson is a stud. People were expecting him to come out last year. He could be a guy that catapults, like we were talking about Hall last year, into our top 10. We didn't even talk about him because we don't even know where he's going to be, and the draft hasn't happened yet. But definitely had a lot of fun today, guys. Thank you, everybody, for stopping in and listening to us talk about running backs. Come back and see us again soon. We're going to be talking it up with some wide receivers and tight ends coming up next week. Bye now.